It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mike Barbary. He's really enjoyed the conversation with him, and it's really centered around what's kind of coming next in our international space. And a commercial attorney at TradeSun, and he's been working in the verticals and things like that to automate and digitize what we do. And in all of our, how do I get all these document checks done? How do I make sure we're touching all the compliance buttons the way we need that? We look for ways to make our jobs easier. That's his jobs. Have numerous back office systems. This is something that can add on. This adds value to what we do today. So we'll listen to the story about how he can to help our banks do more, not necessarily with less employees. With that, I'll welcome Mike Barbary to the podium.
All right. How's everybody doing? Doing all right. And I want to thank Ashley and Alan and Paul and Gerardo for getting me involved here. Thanks to, the backbone of a lot of the trade that's going on. As Paul mentioned, I'm because I've kind of transferred towards some of the front office focus. In my experience, that have helped digitalize different areas of professional services industries, legal, making into what I see is the largest demand for automation, technology, compliance controls. So here's what we're talking about. We're going to hopefully come to some sort of agreement up what those problems could be that are facing banks when it comes to risks. Talk about where we're at today and where we're going to go in the future in terms of how technology can change the landscape. Regional banks here. So thanks again. We can go ahead and click on over. So TradeSun's a company that's a fintech that's headquartered operation center in India and UK. We've worked with a lot of different styles. Some tier one global. And what we've tried to do and what I'm here to do at this conference is learn a lot. If I misunderstand something, interrupt. You don't have to hold your questions. Trade relies on mountains of paper, right? So if you look at the statistics, they're quite at any time. The amount of paper cuts there is probably outrageous. And understand a page, like a specific document, then it's going to, understand what these pages are that are circulating every day, even if it to what is a very manual, labor intensive, and sometimes monotonous. We still have to use paper though, right? I mean, there's a lot of hype around blockchain and how technology us in this room, aside from, the real younger guys like Paul and Gerardo, maybe they'll, for the rest of us, it may not be something in the short term. Some of these technologies have to, paper is transfer of title. And so we're stuck in paper intensive environment and trade. And that requires a lot of manual checking. Bottleneck in terms of how much business you could process, because the information on those papers is very important risk for the bank if they're not properly addressed. So let's go regulations here that are in place. you can actually click again, and I hope you can see better than I can these little of checks, or what are the types of financial crime compliance disciplines that banks avoid running afoul of. I think it's a good reason that sanctions is first, because you have various lists that you check off to make sure there's no bad guys or bad items. From my conversations with a lot of bankers, especially some of these folks in the room here today, scope, in amount, in complexity, and when we talk about the regular banks through this economic warfare that we're seeing, across the globe, this where it could potentially hurt you if you're not up to date on the sanctions, if you're not understanding how specifically but certain goods. And let's talk about some, can anybody guess how much trade-based money laundering costs the industry per year? I got a stat here that I read from the Asian Development Bank that said it was about 9 trillion to 2018, right? So, $1 trillion a year, or we really know how big the issue is. And, when it comes to the types of that you can be doing, it's hard to understand, and it's hard laundering or stocking of goods that can lead to weapons of mass destruction if you don't have a very specific is your expertise, right? What's the expertise of a doc checker is, doesn't appear suspicious. But let's talk about that. The Bureau of Industry and Security came out with a regulation that certain semiconductor China. Now, I don't, is anybody in here a chemist or an engineer? Are as a weapon of mass destruction. So how do you stay abreast of that? How do you train your people to stay on top of all these things? That's where the technology and the automation issue, right? So as these things continue to develop and increase and get more complex, with banks, staying on top of things. So what else? What else are we checking here? Bill of lading verification. What about fair price checking? I think I won't name them, who have said that some of the price checking that they're doing as summer interns on Alibaba. Is this thing priced correctly? Right? I mean, how else would you do it, right? So what start to work with some of the leading data providers in the industry so that you can match up roles for the pricing of goods. How do you know if something's over or under invoiced? How do you take transactional history to ensure that everything's on the up and up? And what's your tolerance as a bank and or dual use goods? So really what we're trying to do for the trade document check surface, alert the person to have a second glance at it if it appears to be outside of state. Really empower the trade checker, spending their time in the monotonous analysis and escalating to compliance where necessary, right? Because there's a lot of pressure on the individuals and the tools and the resources to succeed. Trade-based money laundering is how many times do you have to check for compliance now? Is it before a trade, during a trade, and after, right? In terms of kind of post-mortem analysis where compliance was violated. But now you want to, when you have the advent of new technologies that I'll talk about in a few minutes, and you can get the data in real time to prove, the going forward expectation of the regulators now that they. So how do we get those into the hands of the regional banks? A lot of the top global banks are already live, doing a lot of these checks, relying on data through API. But on behalf of the regional banks, we should be saying, why not us, right? There's some of these technologies as well, and I think some of the reasons that that's become tough is hearing a lot of complaints around that. So how can we do more with less resources? Does anybody have any questions or any kind of topics they want to hone in on here? Yeah, please. So I appreciate the question. If for anybody who's remote or people in the room that didn't hear, I'm going to the business. There's an interesting question about what is fair price check or what is pricing check? What to make sure something is properly priced. So the answer, I mean, I'll give you the lawyer. Depends on your jurisdiction and what the expectations of the regulators are, but we all know that the regulators are now demanding areas of the world. I've seen a lot of it start to develop too in Southeast Asia. They're looking at the size of trade-based money laundering is such a big problem that now they want to know and some reasonable due diligence to check whether or not goods are so over or under invoiced into trade, and of course funding those illicit terrorist where that could be a big source and you may not know as a bank, right? So what if a shoe manufacturer that's shipping shoes, and I were to look back over the past 10 years, maybe they've been laundering money the entire time. How would you know if you don't have additional sources of? These are the solutions that are starting to emerge in the marketplace as the data becomes to be the data conglomerates, S&P Global, you have vessel tracking companies. You're looking at trends, scarcity of goods, seasonality, things like that, plotting a. It's crazy. Like, are you guys the FBI? Like, right? Why is it your charge? Later, I'm trying to help protect us from these increasing, more stringent regulations, but data in your bank, it's locked up in those stacks of paper. What can we do together to serve the regulator? I mean, maybe for over invoicing and there's some money laundering and somebody gets away with tax evasion. Okay, maybe if it's a dual use good, what if it's ball bearings and we funded that and that led to or fertilizer in the balance? That's where you start to say, okay, well, we can't continue to be satisfied with all this information into a system and let the technology start to connect the points. And then, you have are you sure that this washing machine should really be $3,000 per unit? Check the brand name. It's why are the banks having to do this? Maybe we don't have to answer that question. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess I've heard some legal theories that because the banks ownership of the goods is collateral while in transit, it's, you know, it's your money, you're the one making the money off of it. So maybe it's your duty, you know, what you have to do. I'm hoping to find ways around it, or ways around, you know, pinching, right? So I appreciate that question. That's a very common question. I actually really support you on that. Here we are in an industry that, you know, is changing, and um, whether or not it's really have the capacity and capability to change this with the advent of some of these new technology, scalable and more collaborative. I've felt a good spirit of collaboration in this room. So we want to talk about workforce. Do you want to kick to the next slide here? And I think I'm doing all right on time. Just signal me if I'm starting too happy to be back at work. But I think it's good. I think we can all agree it's good to be back, right? It's good to be here at BAFT. Have to take on some of the lessons of the pandemic. If Arlene, if you want to click again. So great resignation, aging workforce. I mean, let's go kind of topic by topic here, right? We now have, it's been complicated probably for a lot of you in trade because somebody has to be the custodian of these documents, operate in a system that's secure because your client's data is in there, but also allows people across collaborate on the same documents and gain some of those efficiencies and specialization that you put so much resources into this over the years. What about the Great Resignation? It's not Halloween. I was working with a bank out on the West Coast, and they had, you know, a pretty decent flow of doing a dozen or so a day. That a few people checking documents. One of them got a great job, the bank, and within the same week, two other people on the team left, and they're in. Could you imagine, right? So how do we adapt to that? How do we not only technology working remotely and still, you know, processing these documents, we have to learn. You know, maybe there's a silver lining on the cloud future, is that it does see more collaboration in these virtual environments that are becoming more secure and more. What else do we want to talk about? I was talking to a good friend and colleague recently who worked at HSBC in global trade. Said in a thick Scottish accent that I'm going to try to. What is it? Okay. You know, what do you mean by that? And I'm starting to learn, we're seeing it across, is going into retirement, and banks are having a tough time replacing those people, because once they leave, it's got, you can't call them up all the time, right? They're on drinking a. How do you start to capture some of that expert knowledge and transfer it to the new generation? You know, people are up using computers and are, you know, very technically savvy, and I may have taken day to day. I'm all virtual, I'm all digital. So if you're going to hire the next gen, you're going to need to be able to provide a working environment that meets their skill set and meets how they work. So yeah, and also capture the legacy of trade bankers that are leaving. It's not, the artificial intelligence doesn't come from the technology, it comes from the people, right? How does it so that the bank can formulaically and consistently use that these experts in the room have moved on to bigger and better things, right? So thanks, Arlene. We can kick to the next. Rising costs, and I think in the same sentence we can talk about revenue being squeezed. I was given a figure that compliance costs are going up to 40%. There's really restricted bandwidth I think if, I've asked them like, what does it take to onboard a new client, a new exporter, importer? More people, there's risk there. How much business is this new client gonna bring to hire additional people in the bank, because people only have so much bandwidth, because half their day maybe is. So this is where we start to talk about solutions here. I think, I've been seeing enough nods that I think we're on the right track and we're kind of in alignment here. We're talking about restricted bandwidth, and we're talking about like, maybe there's one more problem we could talk. That's supposed to be 2.4 trillion by 2025. And I don't think that stat is supposed to be. Don't want exports locked up. We don't want banks, we don't want SMEs and funding, because we want to increase commerce, both for our clients, organizations. So how can you take on all those locked up exports, onboard new clients and risky clients where you don't understand their business? Well, that's where you can start to virtually perform due diligence, or potentially borrow on the due diligence that's already been performed. Means using a platform where, they're developing kind of a trade history. But if there's a high risk industry, high risk territory, high risk good, you can't do business there. Well, no, you just have to avoid running foul of the regulations, or avoiding free powers of due diligence. Then you can start to prevent against some of these other. I'm going to take on more clients. I'm going to close the trade finance gap. The bank, your departments to do that. And this is where we talk about the benefits, because with cloud technology, right? So you're not installing legacy on-premise systems that have to be maintained, that are depreciating assets, grade technology that's in use by the world's top organizations, allowing you to connect and increase the compliance over how you store and how you exchange the data. And we'll flip over here, and this is going to be I think our last slide here. One more time, because I got a few more of these circles. So technology space, and I'm sure we've all heard of blockchain, right? It's going to replace paper. There's all this hype. I think shows a lot of promise, but maybe isn't fully mature technology to actually match some of the volume. Blockchain is the future, but where do you start, right? Well, what about technology? Well, first, what is that? It's crawling the web and getting information that can help transactions you're getting involved with. It's using sensors, tracking containers, ships, vessels. Very interesting use cases there. At TradeSun, and me and myself, we focus. First, let's talk about data. Two types of data. One, there's the most that's locked in those documents that the bank's processing. So you may be entering those into a back-end system, audit committees. You may be, learning more about, timing it takes and things like that. Where does that data live in your bank? And how are you serving other internal clients within the bank so they can learn more about trends with your client businesses? That question, hopefully you guys don't have a great answer to, because that's part of is unlock that data and use it to make more intelligent decisions, make the right choice. Artificial intelligence, this can be something where there's a lot of hype as well. And like, let's use the analogy of self-driving cars. You know, anybody trust that? Sure, maybe on like a little campus or something where they're all driving along together, that's fine. If you have a computer making decisions in a black box and you don't understand what those decisions are, that's unacceptable for your tech and compliance folks. So it's the proper application of artificial intelligence unlock some value without those risks. And that's, we believe the theory. A lot of people are selling machine learning to you. What do you want the machine interaction in every click? It could be learning some mistakes because people make mistakes. So you don't want to build. So with artificial intelligence, what can you do to have the system collect and validate, apply the right learnings so you don't make the same mistakes in the future and you can accelerate that the decision was made for the right reasons and have changes that have been made. So that's a lot of information. I know it's kind of complicated, right? So Ashley, maybe you want to kind of take over and run the room. Thanks. Potentially to collaborate, work together. So yeah, absolutely.
Technology is scanning all documents.
Yes.
They're scanning all these documents and then running it through all these, trade-based money laundering, sanction. What have you found to be the accuracy level? Like, what is the level of that it's catching what you're hoping it's catching?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, right? Yeah. Documents, we're going to use natural language processing to contextualize information that's to understand like a human brain. There's a lot of like standardization and normalization that has to be applied to the data, and then I'm going to come up with an accuracy number. There's a few ways we can measure. I think what's important is to take a look at the bank right now and say, well, what's your current accuracy level? See the accuracy and how repeatable is it? So I think when you're talking about scanning a doc, can we know what type of document it is and get the information off that document? I think at first glance, like a first or AI, you're going to be looking at somewhere between 40 and 70% of it. How rapidly can that advance once we start to look at the context of these documents? Neural symbolic intelligence can look at an invoice like a face, is in this order and in this arrangement that produces certain information with certain field values. And for classification example, if we take a certain type of common document and documents, we can see it go by percent. And really it's first pass yield that we're trying to get 95% right off, not right off the bat, but after a little bit of this learning's taken place. Annual tasks of entering data for the, because it has to be the trade expert that checks it, right? Because you will take that to the regulator and say, we got 95% of it, don't worry. No, you need 100. But how much is foundation is there? And we can talk more about the accuracy. I think the more participants through these systems, the better the learnings get, and it's really exponential, we've seen. So, and thanks for the question.
Thanks.
What's the first question? Else have any questions? Yes.
And I'm not sure if I should ask her, especially in a forum like this, considering that or local banks.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the advances of efficiency that is bringing to the table. How do you how is the equilibrium now between the cost of implementing a technology and the to do this? That's
Okay.
trying now to replace and I'm centers of operations are in Mexico.
Okay.
We have more availability of people, but still we're places experienced people. When you're talking about these and especially focusing in banks that are local or do not have probably the critical mass that some of the global banks that are on the news are having.
Right. Technology. How can
Right.
you justify that against your volume if you're a relatively small bank? Well, I've actually got some pretty good information from you about this. I'm talking to other bankers, and we're here to figure want to do at TradeSun for as an example is find out how like a per transaction type of fee with cloud technology that's scalable and dedicated at any one time. You don't have to install some big virtual environment or some big, on location at your bank. So implementation costs can be fees in the case of smaller businesses can be mitigated in favor of transactional costs. Stand up these environments. And if we were to look at, and invest together in a solution that can serve all of our needs, and you pay according to how much come on a platform, run through some documents, pay your fair share for those documents, and then without having that huge OpEx or CapEx expenditure, and keeping that so that you're still profiting off the trade. That's what this is all about. We want maybe amount of volume of trades you could do, and now you have more profit. And we think that's a question that I want us to continue to explore. Sense because we got to talk to each bank and find out, what are your budgets looking like? What do you invest in your current? Can this make you money? Right. Thank you.
Regulators, how much time have you guys spent with regulators to find out what your very first slide that kind of had vessels and had base money and all those stuff? Being a future, for all of us. Because when I talk to my compliance folks, they're like, we're going to wait until they bring it up, or we're going to wait until somebody else in. So I think I'm curious what the vibe is in the regulator whole laundry list.
That's an excellent question. And if I had right, but I think you're being very smart when you say don't bring it up and don't ask, because you don't want to on your part. So what's the vibe in the regulatory community? Think you're more activity and action in certain jurisdictions than others. I think you can see the FCA demand nearly every one of those checks. I mean, they're talking about an 83 This is for top global banks that they're applying, right? Because it's a top-down approach. You have to kind of be able to prove the Authority of Singapore, MAS, it's starting to actually build platforms that can provide these services. Regulatory BAFT. So I think a lot of times it's a future state requirement, and that may already lands on your desk, right? And they're asking to say, hey, what are you doing now? I may not be the closest to the regulators. In fact, I'm and a lot of times referring on the honesty of better than relying on the honesty of lawyers. But a lot of our customers are the ones giving us this from the Department of Justice Monitor or the FCA or whoever's coming to knock and see what they're doing. The more the regulatory solutions and their affordability increases, unfortunately, the more it's going to banks, the regionals, and then even the smaller banks. Hopefully that answers your question is the best I could do.
So you said you have a large global bank that uses your. They get to say a 95% accuracy, let's call it. How do they deal with it? There's somebody in their back office that still has to go view every single document, figure out what that 5% is that they missed.
Yes. And it's not as mysterious as it sounds, right? By the way, I want to offer anybody who wants to see some of the screens and how this stuff works. I can you can take a look and you can get a taste or a flavor, give you a little tour of how these things appear. So as principle, and is that okay? I'm seeing a lot of nods, so I'm saying the right thing. Checker and then potentially a compliance review. So what AI can do is potentially take at some point, right? So the AI as a maker. So how can the system make these, that has captured all the relevant information that you need to run against the rules against a sanctions check. So a lot of the document information that we've gathered, and then you'll see that in the field values. Okay, we've identified that, for instance, in a letter of credit, shipping destinations any West Coast US. You can see now there's parent-child relationships and annotations in the data that the user in the UI, Port of Long Beach, Port of Los Angeles, all these things broken out. And then, well, if it's not highlighted on the document in your display screen, for instance, you see a little handwritten note in the corner. You lasso that information and then boom, it's right into the system. If there's something you missed, such as any fintech vendor is going to give you certain accuracy, percentages, it's still up to. And we have a lot of different tools and resources available to make sure that they can truly see, have a lot of visibility against that data. So training really, yeah.
Platform be combined with an already existing platform? So I use it's like my vendor for my type of
Yes.
this is
Your question,
okay.
but also yes. Yes is the answer too.
Okay, have you already done firms like combine your technology with theirs?
Yes. Great question about this is kind of a question about integration or interfacing with the banks and existing tech, not replacing it, but expanding it and sharing information, make sure those two systems talk. We work and we partner with some of the industry leading back office solutions, whether that be Finastra or China. A lot of banks and some of our customer banks have their own homegrown solutions on system that we've performed full integrations with. So we've done it with vendor solutions, other fintech engines. And with the advent of API technology, applications can be push and pulled and sent between two different systems. So it's matching up field extracted off your documents in a system like TradeSun is then funneled perfectly into your back office system so that you have a full needs, right? Now you have everything, all the evidence linked to every transaction of what you. Oh, we got to flag that this may be high risk goods because it's handheld electronics. We checked, the chips that were in the thing, and it didn't appear on the dual use goods list, and it seems reasonably priced. If the regulator comes knocking, you don't have to go through stacked banker boxes. You just click to run a back office system that you already have, or that can be directly through TradeSun. And there's an most open and modular platform we possibly can. So right now we have cloud and we will also be releasing APIs that can just go right into your backend system. Let's say or maybe just vessels, you can build up, or you don't have to do all this. What does your roadmap look like in the bank? What do you want to start doing? What this new technology? So we can work with you with our architects.
Something like that with certain vendors. Like if you've already done
Asking about price breaks if we've already done work. Yeah, if you sign today, I can give you a great price break. Now I'm just question. I answer this a lot. If we're going to build an integration with Finastra, it's going to benefit our business development and serve other clients. So no, why would you? You're not going to bear that cost. You're going to pay your fair share for use of the software. I think that's the concept I'm trying to build. It has to be a reasonable investment. It has to make sense. Banks shouldn't be leaders into doing all these things that are so overwhelming and costly. It should match your business. We've integrated now with even ESG, right? So now you can perform ESG checks companies where you can say, okay, does this align with our corporate objectives? Important there, and not bear the cost individually, right? Good.
Yeah,
Excellent. So I'm not kicked out yet.
I appreciate Gotta move
Yeah.
on to the next presentation. I feel like everybody in this room could ask 20 more questions and we could keep industry development for us. And yeah, really appreciate your time. Mike will be free to grab him at the reception or at the International Trade Conference.